So, hello and welcome back to all of you from around the world to the IT Leader Growth Summit. In this session, we're going to discuss the topic, the Service Delivery Review, the missing Agile feedback loop. The person talking to us about this today is Matthew Phillip. Matt is a Director of Global Talent and Capability at ThoughtWorks. Drawing on lean and agile values, principles, and practices to offer experience, models, and options, he helps organizations and teams to continuously become fit for their purpose. He's especially passionate about building learning organizations and creating humanizing and engaging work environments. He tweets at Matt Phillip and blogs at mattphillip.wordpress.com. And Matt is also one of the founding organizers of the Lean Kanban St. Louis meetup and a board member of the Association for Talent Development in the St. Louis chapter. After this mouthful, I'll just directly hand over to Matt to give us his introduction without further ado. Thanks, Matt, for being here.
Thank you for having me, Matthias. It's a pleasure to talk about something that's really interesting to me, and I hope will be interesting and helpful to the people listening in the conference. So the Service Delivery Review, I'm going to share a few slides, and then we can have a chat about what I've been talking about. Great. So as you mentioned, I'm interested in helping organizations become fit for their purpose, continuously fit for their purpose. And so this is a matter of really the core about how businesses survive today in our era of a digital service economy. It's really important for us to understand what makes our organizations, what makes our teams even, what makes our individual selves fit for our purpose. What do people want from us, and why did they select us? So it's nothing less important than the issue of survivability and self-sustaining, keeping going, where most businesses, most organizations are in business in order to stay in business. Now, we might have a higher level purpose, but really our underlying purpose is to keep going, is to stay in business. So that's what I'm going to be talking about in that context today. That's why I'm interested in the Service Delivery Review. So many of our audience will be familiar with the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. And so I think everybody has a favorite part of the manifesto. My favorite part is actually the very first part. So this idea that we are uncovering better ways of delivering or developing software. And the reason I like this so much is because it really gets us in a state of dynamic, active, adaptive change. And we're constantly uncovering better ways of doing things. And so part of my hypothesis or my approach to this is to say, what are some things that have worked well with Agile, and what things have we needed to keep learning? And so when I think about that phrase, we are uncovering better ways, when I hear that, I think in my mind the idea of sensing and responding. The idea that we need to be constantly doing this, constantly uncovering better ways through sensing and responding to what our customers value and what we provide. So a very simple example of this in terms of, I think something most people have experienced is coffee, the coffee buying experience. So I like to ask the question, what do you value? What do you value when you go to Starbucks or whatever your favorite coffee shop is? What do you value? Do you value something about the product, how good the coffee is, the quality of the cappuccino? Probably so. You probably also value something about the service and whether it's been given to you in a timely fashion, the speed of the delivery, the predictability of the delivery, the interaction you have with the person giving you the coffee, whether they've gotten your name right on the coffee. I know that's kind of a source of a fun meme on Twitter. But the point here is that even in something as simple as coffee, we see that it's not just a product business that Starbucks is in, but also a service business. And so the idea that drinking coffee has become as much about the cafe and the barista as the coffee itself. In this book, this is an older book, 1973 is when it was published, but Daniel Bell actually predicted that service would replace products as the primary driver of economic activity. And indeed, today, the service sector employs more people than the product sector. And so this has come to fruition in the course of a single generation. So this is an important comment. I think that I would recommend this book from Jeff Sussna, Designing Delivery. But he says that service providers must make promises about listening and responding as much as making and delivering. And so we think about developing that mechanism for an organization or a team to say, well, we're developing a product, but how do we listen and respond? Again, that idea of sensing and responding needs to be built into how we design ourselves, how we design our organizations and our teams. The idea of making the right promises. So the idea that we want to enhance our brand, our organization's identity by doing these things that are sensing and responding to our customers' needs. So one of the ways that I like to think about any organization, my organization, organizations that we consult with, is to see things through the Kanban lens. And so for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with this concept, this is something Andy Carmichael, whose blog I post here, he's written some interesting things about the Kanban lens, as have others in the Kanban method space. But basically, the idea is that we want to see organizations as networks of services rather than simple org charts or departments. There's tons of services that are happening throughout our organization to our customers, to ourselves. And so I've got an actual experience that I'll share with you here. This is a few weeks ago, and I had an internal presentation to give to some stakeholders, and it was kind of important. So I wanted to make sure that the look and feel of the presentation was up to par. Now, my presentation design skills are pretty weak in terms of you can see here the idea of graying out the person's name took me like a whole day to do that. So I don't have a lot of design competency, but thankfully we have people in my organization who are really good at that sort of thing. And so we asked for some help. Could you help someone from the design department take a look at this and get some help? So the question was, that came back to us, was there any due date? And so it gave us pause, because at this point we didn't have a due date. But when people ask you that and you don't have a due date, you typically give them a fake due date. And why is that? It's because we don't really have a good sense of trust or of any kind of quantitative way to manage these things. And so we don't know when people are going to get to it. So we tell them, well, by next Friday. And so this is what happened. So we ended up having kind of a back and forth on email. And at one point we started to get to a point where we had a deadline. And so now the response was, well, this person can get to it early next week, and she's pretty fast. Ultimately, that was not satisfactory, because pretty fast, it's a qualitative description of the service delivery, but it's not really quantitative. And so that's where we get to the problem. What's the problem we're trying to solve? And so really we want to understand, how do we know what makes our service delivery fit for its purpose? I've worked for many years with teams and organizations that were really, really good, really mature groups, great at delivery, most of which use the standard Agile feedback loops, which I'll talk about in a minute. But really, a lot of these teams struggle to find out and to have a reliable construct for getting the feedback on how their service delivery was. And you know, some of these teams were really, really great at delivery, made great products, but ultimately ended up with a dissatisfied customer because the customer feedback, they didn't have a constructive way to deal with the feedback on the service. It was almost like a blind spot. How are we delivering? Is it satisfactory? What is the customer value? And a lot of that information was lost. Teams that did really great work, and yet ultimately were scratching their heads about why their customer no longer wanted to work with them. So businesses don't need merely the ability to change, which is what we talk about in Agile delivery a lot, but to change in the right direction. So here's a point that I've observed happening. In the absence of any quantitative feedback about the performance of our service delivery, we're always going to have these arbitrary due dates, artificial boundaries. So a lot of organizations, especially at the management level, will use these kind of things, so red, amber, green charts. This gives us a qualitative sense of what's going on. Obviously, green is good. You need to pay attention to things in red, but there's really no sense of the fitness for purpose of these things. Why are these things failing in terms of a quantitative way to manage these things? So it makes it hard for our teams to improve, other than to say, well, some of these heuristics are working and some are not. But these are not necessarily driven from a customer standpoint. Moreover, like I said before, teams that are trying to do good work, they often lack clear and measurable goals. And you can see here from this research, fewer than 10% of employees had that. So going back to the idea of thinking about product and service and how do we understand fitness of those things, if you think about these as two axes, one, the component is whether it's a product or service, and then from a team or internal perspective and then the customer's perspective. So from these four areas of this quadrant, then we have feedback needs. So starting from the upper left, is our team healthy? So that's looking from an internal perspective. Have we built the thing right? From a product standpoint, is our product healthy? Have we built the thing right? Have we built the product right? And then on the other side, we have on the lower right, is our product fit for its purpose? That is, have we built the right thing in the customer's eyes? And then on the upper right, is our service delivery fit for its purpose? Does the customer value the way that we're delivering this work? So we have feedback loops, traditionally speaking from Agile methods, Agile practices. We have retrospectives, we have stand-ups, flow planning meetings. Those are ways that we can understand our team from an internal perspective. Have we built the thing right? Product-wise, we have all these, a lot of times, automated systems, right? So automated build, test, continuous integration servers. We have code metrics to give us a sense, is our code healthy? Is it an extensible system? Have we, whether we're doing service-oriented architecture or what it is, we at least have a sense internally, is this healthy code? And performance monitors our systems up. And then similarly, from the customer's perspective, we have demo or showcase, things that we are doing regularly, hopefully, with our customer to say, hey, is this the right thing? Is this the thing you wanted? We have A/B tests. We can do stuff in production now. Obviously, usage and actually making money, those are pretty good indicators that we've built the right product. The problem is that we really lack this, like I said, a blind spot in terms of what the customer values about our service delivery. A lot of times these are things that are unstated expectations about a team. And so we need some mechanism for understanding what those expectations are and are we delivering to those expectations. Just like when we talk about building features, building things product-wise, we have a lot of mature processes for those things. Like I said, the demo, getting user feedback, user experience testing. But we don't have a similar feedback loop for understanding whether our service delivery is fit. And that's where the service delivery review comes in. So basically, the way I learned about the service delivery review is from the Kanban method, which talks about introducing feedback loops. And so you see here in the middle, it's connected to lots of other feedback loops, the Kanban meeting or the stand-up flow planning meeting, but also risk review and more strategy review and operations review to give us a sense of where this particular service, which is usually a single team or single delivery team's Kanban, the work that they're doing, how does it fit in with the organization? How do we know it's fit for its purpose? So this is my definition for what a service delivery review is. It's a regular, quantitatively oriented discussion between a customer or you might say a customer representative, and a delivery team about the fitness for purpose of its service delivery. All those bold-faced words are really important. I'll talk about those as we go. But really, this orients us toward this idea. This again comes from Susna's book. Designing for service and not just software focuses IT on its purpose rather than on the technical implementation. So really, I've seen this time and time again. Product development is obviously important, and we've gotten really good at that. There's a lot of maturity in the marketplace in terms of product development. But what I've seen is that people in IT, whether they're CIOs, people from the business side, product managers, really care about how we're developing these things. It's almost like, if you think about a non-IT example, I know nothing about automobiles, about cars. And so I have a really good mechanic that I trust, and he knows about cars. But when I take my car to him, I'm relying on him to fix it, right? That's usually a given. He's gonna do the right product development for my car. But what really allows me to choose him or not choose him again and again is when he says, this is gonna take 2 weeks to fix, or this is gonna cost around this much. I don't know if it's gonna take 2 weeks, if it should take 2 days, but I trust that he's doing the right thing. But when he does tell me it's gonna take 2 weeks, I expect him to deliver toward that thing. And I've seen and talked with people in management, CIOs, who actually said, you know, the thing I care about more is, yes, the product demo is important, but I really want to know, is this team delivering in the way I expect them to? So this leads us to some possible topics, and we can talk about these a little bit more in depth, but it's all oriented around, why have I chosen this particular team? Obviously, we choose teams and organizations because they deliver the right product. But are they doing that? Are they delivering that product in a way that is important to me? So we talk about delivery times. We talk about blocker clustering. So why is work stopped? What are the quantitative ways we can assess that? Are we working on the right type of work? So percentage allocation to work types. Classes of service. Do we expect certain types of work to be done faster than others? A lot of times we do have important dates that we want to make. And so how well are we doing toward those deadlines? So due date performance, and on the contrary, how many times do we miss those fixed dates? Policy changes, how much work we need to have in progress in order to affect delivery times and throughput. And then things like that we get from the front line, so to speak. So social media reports, usually which are negative. But we can also survey customers using a fitness for purpose box score and other kinds of surveys. And then ultimately trying to proactively manage what obstacles stand in the way of our service delivery. So here are some metrics then that correspond with some of those things. If you're looking in the upper right-hand corner, you can see delivery time, throughput, mean time to restore service, as opposed to mean time between failures. So this is a mind shift in terms of how we manage our teams. We're going to have failures. We're going to have, in a very complex environment, digitally speaking, we're going to have lots of things that could go wrong. So what people value, though, is, yes, they value those things not going wrong, but when they do, those things being restored quickly. So we want to optimize toward the mean time to restoring service, not necessarily between failures. It's also going to drive internal behaviors like innovation, because it's going to allow us to not fear breaking things. Right, so again, we want to get to the point where we understand our customer's reason for selecting us. And so no customer that I've ever met says, I hired your team because of their amazing velocity. Maybe because they're producing a lot, or because they have good quality. They're dependable, they're reliable, they deliver when they say they're going to, but velocity is not necessarily a business-oriented metric or fitness, a selection criterion. So here's some examples, and we can look at these a little bit further, but a scatter plot of delivery time will give you a good sense of how things are delivering over time. The value demand ratio, this is a nice metric that that brings in a quality component, basically saying how much of the stuff that we're working on is value added type of work as opposed to failure demand work, bugs, rework. And this allows us to have a quantitative sense of saying, our customer really expects us to be working on, in this example, 75% of our work is going to be value added work. So this is a nice little tension for those of you who work with product owners or product managers to say, basically what you're prioritizing, is it enough? Is it higher than the threshold that we've set? Also, the idea of using delivery times can help us do probabilistic forecasting. This is a whole topic unto itself, but the idea here is that we want to be able to give our customer the kind of information that they need and that they value from us in order to make better decisions. So you can see this is giving us a sense of the probabilities at different points in time that will complete work. So in this case, when can the next 42 items be completed? And it's telling us, well, there's very little chance it'll be completed before September, middle September, but that we have a good chance after the middle of September of delivering it. That's all based on data. And this is a good way to have that conversation among managers to say, there's not just a single feature. There's a way that we need to think about probabilistic forecasting to say that there's multiple possible scenarios in the future. And again, this idea of helping us become more perceptive of changes in the business environment and more responsive to those changes. So this, again, this theme of sensing and responding, being perceptive, listening and responding is what we want to aim for. So I'll stop there. We can talk more about how we get started, how some of these other things that we want to talk about in service delivery review.
Great. Yeah, I think let's take a step back, and I've got a few questions for you. I think the one thing that I really liked is that focusing on your service is equal to focusing on your outcome, or focusing on your purpose. It gives an outcome, but it is focusing on your purpose. So I really liked that. So if you're saying, I mean, coming from a product development point of view, we tend to lack looking at the service other than internally. So that's the external one that's missing.
Yeah, that's right. I think we do a good job in a lot of organizations of having retrospectives, for example. It's one of my favorite things to do in a team. But like you said, those meetings tend to be inward focused, and even to the point, I think Cessna says this in his book, they devolve into complaining about not having enough muffins, like who didn't bring enough muffins for the meeting the other day, And so it's really internal focused, which is helpful, but it's not really of concern to the customer insofar as it affects delivery time or predictability. Again, like using that restaurant metaphor, I choose a restaurant partly obviously for the food, the wine, but also the service delivery. How long does it take me to get seated? Or if I make a reservation, will they have my table for me when I come? I care about what's going on in the kitchen because I generally care about how humans are getting on, but really that's a secondary concern when I'm a customer. I don't choose the restaurant because they have a happy kitchen. I choose the restaurant because they serve me in a reasonable time. They keep their promises to me. So it's the same thing, I think, with the pattern of retrospectives. Absolutely important, but ultimately not why a customer selects us.
So teams, especially of developers and of IT people, are often very, as you said, very, very inward focused, and they are also, let's face it, a lot of them are introverts. So how do you work on this to work with the client, to really get into the face of the client? What are the things that you're doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's really as simple as asking, why do you choose us? What do you value about what we do? You can do that as early as when you have a contract or when you've got a new project happening. Why did you choose this team? Excuse me. Now, if it's internal IT, obviously it's because You're our internal people. But
Hmm.
you can ask the question, what do you value about us? There's a exercise I've used with teams to get started with this. It's a service delivery Yelp review. So basically, if you imagine any kind of customer review that you have for a restaurant online, you're imagining with the customer, again, who's requesting the service, say, write a review as if it was as if it were a restaurant. What would you value about our product or about our service? And that's a fun way to get people thinking in terms of what they value. Because like I said earlier, a lot of times it's an implicit expectation that's not voiced or made explicit. And so the more you can do that, I think that's a nice way to get people started with the Yelp review.
I like that, the Yelp review. You said anyway, if somebody is now really saying, okay, well, how can I get started? Was that, you said you might have a slide or something like that. Was that about the Yelp review, or is that something else where you're really getting started into this? Because I think that's the first thing. And we're saying it's missing, but I think a lot of our viewers are saying, okay, how? I get you that I should do it, but how?
Yep, exactly. So let me see if I can share this again. So
okay, yes, we are there.
All right. So this is an example of the Yelp review.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a fun way you can do it as a group, and you can again, you need to have the customer involved though. That's because they're the only ones who can tell you why they're selecting you. Because you can tell the customer why you think they've selected you, but ultimately that's not the same thing. Another way you can do this is a bit more involved, a little bit more structured. But this is basically a service delivery review canvas that I created to help teams get started. So this is something, again, like any good canvas, you should just use it to get started or use it for having a conversation. You can adapt it as you need. But this really gets you, I think, thinking in terms of what's important to the customer. And so, whether it's developers or people, who, like you said, are more introverted, this is not necessarily a lot of times in a retrospective, you have a more of a feelings-based or a sense-based, how are we feeling about things? This is really moving us toward a quantitative way to express expectations. And so you can see at the very top, just identifying what are the services that we provide. Are we working on new feature development? Are we supporting multiple systems? And then from there, trying to elicit what are the expectations we have, what makes us fit for the purpose. Why, if it's a downstream team that's depending on us, what kind of a level of service are they expecting? If it's basically new feature development, what's important? Do we want features that are pushed out very quickly, predictably? What are those things? And so again, having the customer think through and really express those things is part of what this canvas is meant to do. And then you see the bottom part of the slide is the canvas is inputs and outputs. So what are the things we bring into the service delivery review meeting, which again should have a customer or a customer representative in it. And really, you can do it every 2 weeks. Probably every once a week is probably too often, but it depends on your needs. And how granularly you want to be sensing things. But this is giving us a sense of different performance points. So due date performance. Do we care about fixed date items? What's the performance of those things? Expedite items. How fast does it take us to respond to something that's declared an expedite? And then standard urgency. So you can see some of these things are aligning with what we call cost of delay profiles, which are ways of assessing the urgency with the value of work. Blocker clustering, I mentioned this is a technique that we can use to quantitatively assess what's the effect or the impact of our blockers. What do we want to do about that? A lot of times there's something the customer can be doing, so it's a way to quantitatively manage that. And then what are our current policies? So this is a lot of times how we treat work that comes into the system. So when do we pull work? What do we do once we've pulled work and started it? And so making those policies explicit is really important so that everybody has a sense of what we do. And a lot of times customers don't know. You've probably seen examples of a higher ranking person in the organization sends an email to the team and says, hey, could you look at this thing? Could you do this? And the team, because it's not quite explicit, just expected, this is a higher ranking person, drops everything and starts working on that. Well, later you find out that the vice president or whoever it was who emailed the team didn't really want the team to stop working on everything and do his or her request. It was just an idea. And so making a policy like that explicit to say, when the VP requests something, that's a higher priority. And then we can discuss that with the customer to say, is that actually what we want to be doing? What's the impact of that kind of a thing on our predictability? Do you value predictability over servicing certain people's requests? And then basically outputs on the other side there. This is a way for us to think about the future and say, what do we want to do to reduce risk? What's our forecast? And again, we could use a probabilistic forecast. And then I really like the idea of, because this is quantitative, putting our improvement ideas in the form of hypotheses, measuring them like we would a science experiment. So we believe that some change will result in some outcome, and we'll know that based on this signal or this measurement. And then the last thing is policy changes. So we believe that decreasing our work in progress limit across the system from 10 items to 5 items will result in more predictable delivery times, for example. And it's nice because you can just measure that straight away after you do that. So that's, again, this canvas can be helpful. Use it to start the conversation, adapt it as you need to.
Yeah, I think the big thing about all of those things is always to adopt and adapt. Adapt it to whatever you need, and don't follow it slavishly. But I like a few of the words in there. First of all was the fitness criteria, and then also the hypothesis of doing that and that, because that goes in with something that I tend to always say when I coach teams is a project is only finished when the business outcome you had in mind has been achieved. So it's not finished when code is finished.
Right.
For the business is only finished once they've made the money, because they've set out, you have to develop this because of something, or you have to provide this service because of something. What is this because of? And what was the original hypothesis? Because the original hypothesis was, if we do this, then this. And only that when that then this is achieved. And to also as a programming team understand what was that original hypothesis.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I think with all of these kind of questions, it's orienting us toward the customer, and that's what we want to be doing. That's ultimately, I think the point you're getting at too is that it's going to help us be survivable in the end.
Yes.
Only
survivable and fit for purpose. I mean, why? What was the purpose? The purpose was this outcome of the hypothesis. That was the purpose why we were asked to do this.
Yeah, exactly, and that changes. And so
Absolutely.
There's any number of businesses you can look at who are dinosaurs now, because they were once fit for their purpose. They were precisely fit for their purpose, and yet they didn't continually adapt to understanding what made them fit for their purpose. As the business landscape, as the environment changed around them, they weren't continually sensing and responding. And so it's important, again, whatever your organization is in terms of a startup, scale up, a long established player in the marketplace. These kinds of market dynamics are worth paying attention to, because it's either going to be the thing that helps you get to the next level, or keeps you from going extinct.
So if you're saying, I mean, we've now established that one needs to do this. How do you normally get access to that client? Because that is one of the other things that the teams, I mean, the IT teams in general, whether they be service delivery or whether they be programming, they are often 3 or 4 levels removed from the client. How do they get to that?
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, first, I should probably clarify, when I talk about a customer, it's really anyone who's consuming the service. So we have external customers who pay us for something. We also have many internal customers. The example I gave of people in our company's design group helping us do some service. So, HR functions, HR serves its customers being their employees, right? And so whatever place in the business you are, you have customers. Maybe, again, they're the direct people who are consuming your services, but then there's also indirect people. And so, yeah, you're right. There's depending on where you're working, there's going to be layers or points of indirection to the actual end user customer. I've worked with salespeople or demand people to say, hey, you've got a relationship with this customer. Can you help us understand? Can you ask that fitness question? What makes us fit for your purpose? And so having someone, again, customer representative in the meeting. So again, we're trying to tighten that feedback loop. The more intermediaries we have, the longer it takes. But as long as we're getting that message across all the way to the end customer, that's what we want. Whether it's through salespeople, through business development people, through sensing on Twitter. Like usually it's a complaint, but being able to monitor those things using surveys. I think that's important. If you don't have direct contact with people, at least saying, hey, can you whether it's a customer service agent saying, hey, can you help get some data from this kind of thing, so we at least get a better sense of what makes us fit for a purpose.
Yeah, I think that's the great thing, as you're saying. I mean, one needs to sometimes be a bit creative and work with the intermediaries. And as you say, sometimes there's a service request, so have the question asked afterwards if it's closed. I mean, that's the very basic one. After every service request, close it and ask the question, how was the service? Mm-hmm. I mean, 87% of people say nothing if they are unhappy, but if they're prompted, then they might just say something. Mm-hmm. And even less people are say something if they're happy, because that's not usually what you get. Whereas also that positive feedback is sometimes that positive reinforcement is very important.
Right.
So, and I like it you had on your canvas, both of them.
I've got an example. I mentioned the idea of this type of survey, a fitness for purpose card. Mm-hmm. I can show you that really quickly if you like.
Maybe, that's maybe a good idea.
Yeah, let me see if this is working for us.
Yes, it is.
Right. So this is something that comes from David Anderson and Alexei Zeglov. They have a book that came out just recently. It's called Fitness for Purpose. They talk about these cards, and I've actually made this available online. People can download it, basically copy. It's a Google Doc, Google form, yes. And you can use it for your own purposes. But basically, it's explicitly asking, why did you choose our service? List up to 3 reasons. So I chose you because you're predictable, you're trustworthy, because your price is low. I chose you because you tend to work on the things that I want you to work on. You get back to me in time. And so all these questions, and so then we find out from the actual customers what's valuable, and we say, based on why you chose us, then how well did we perform on those things? So we exceeded your expectations, or we found nothing useful. And so it's interesting because when we find out that their expectations were exceeded, that might be an opportunity to do some market segmentation to say, oh, this might be a premium service. If people are really, if we're over delivering in a sense, we might be able to either dial that back or segment that into a premium offering. Kind of like Amazon Prime, for example. People value certain service aspects of that level of service, and they're willing to pay for it. What might we be willing to, or able to find out about our customers based on what they value, especially when we're doing things well?
I like that you're saying not only for the feedback, but also for new product development or new service development.
Exactly right.
That feedback can be used quite nicely. Yes, definitely.
Exactly right. Yeah, and these are, we touched on some of these things. I think these are more universal service expectations, but this is interesting. I think a lot of these things again relate to IT service. Not just treating me courteously, being accessible, but really doing what I ask promptly. What is prompt in this case for people? That varies depending on who that person is. Tell me what to expect. I mentioned the idea of my mechanic telling me what to expect. I don't know, but when you tell me what to expect, I expect you then to do it and keep your promises, which is the next thing. do it right the first time. These are kind of standard things, but following up. It's interesting. Susna talks about it in his book. Back in 2012, Amazon AWS, they had like a 20-hour outage, and at the beginning, they actually communicated very minimally with their customers, and they thought that people don't want to hear from us; they just wanted us to fix the problem. Well, they started getting a lot of flames on Twitter and social media, and so they sensed and responded quickly enough to say, "Oh, well, we'll start keeping you informed." And so they then started actively keeping people up to date, telling them what to expect, and that actually changed the public's view of what was going on, such that they were initially angry and annoyed to actively rooting for Amazon to fix this problem. And so even that example is really important because it helps us see, wow, what we maybe assume customers want is not really what they want. And so all these things, and then understanding in what quantity or what levels of threshold do people want these things in.
Yeah, I mean, I come from a professional services background, and that was also one of my big aha moments over time was, and I think you alluded to it a bit with your example of the design. Clients don't necessarily have a deadline. So if you are saying, and what we often looked at is what's the impact to you, what's your criticality, and we are saying according to that, we'll do something about it within the next 4 days. But we also put the proviso in, if you don't agree with our assessment that this can be dealt in 4 days, please come back to us. And the complaints are going just down, because if somebody doesn't agree, they come back courteously and say, I don't agree because of this and that, and then we can change it. We can say, okay, I'll agree, we'll deal with it right away. Mm-hmm. In 99% of the cases, the user says, great, I'm happy that you do it in 4 days. And as you also they said, as long as you then do it in 4 days, right, or even better in 3.5. And if you do it in 2, they will be absolutely ecstatic. Whereas if they had just sent it in, you do it in 2, they say, why are you only coming back now?
Yep, exactly right. It really creates that trust relationship we have with your customers. And so, being able to know what your service performance is one important thing. Just start measuring things that are important to your customer, whether it's delivery times. And those are the kind of things that, like you're saying, you're going to be able to then have a proactive conversation about expectations. Maybe 4 days is perfectly sufficient. And, I wouldn't do anything with this stuff if I got it in a single day anyway. Or maybe some things are important. And so what can we do to have that constructive conversation? The thing is, it works on many levels. Organizationally, where we talk about services, all building up into operations level concerns, with teammates to each other, even individual relationships. So I use personal Kanban and to manage my own personal tasks, so stuff around my house with my family. And actually, my wife, this is a few months ago, had a couple things for me to do, and because in the past I hadn't developed that level of trustworthiness with my service delivery, and so she rightly asked me, "Are you going to be able to get these things done today? These 2 things?" And because I just started doing my own personal service delivery review to understand how often do I follow through on due date expectations, I was able to tell her, love, I have a 93% chance of getting these things done today. So, which was sufficient at the time. So obviously she'd rather I be 100% due date performance, but even interestingly, even just doing it for myself, my personal service to the review, I've actually increased that to 95%. So, we tend to, you've heard the expression, you get what you measure. And so this is making sure that what you're measuring is important. Otherwise, you're just going to be creating vanity metrics for yourself.
Absolutely. I think vanity metrics is the bane of any manager or any team. And still we do it too often because we can with that look good, but it's a feel good. But again, I think your customer reviews will also highlight a lot of these vanity measures, because even the vanity measures were put in place not because we wanted them to be vanity measures, but because somebody thought it was a real measure.
Right. Exactly. I mean, we tend to measure the things that we can measure too. And so when we have the conversation with the customer to say, what do you value? That's going to force us to either instrument ourselves in a way that we can measure these things. If all you're tracking today is, if you're doing Scrum, for example, if all you're doing is measuring story points, well, you're going to have to start doing something a little bit differently if your customer values predictability or delivery times, and being able to do a probabilistic forecast. You can't do that necessarily with story points. So you might have to start tracking commit and delivery dates, which is, it's a very simple thing to do, but if that's important to your customer, you'll just need to make some small changes that way.
I think one last thing that we touched on when we started talking, or before we started here talking, is we are doing this now. Well, how are we scaling this? I don't know. That is maybe another point that we need to quickly touch on.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. I know lots of people have that kind of question. So I mentioned before that the idea is that a service delivery review is meant for a single service or a team that's providing a service. Again, if you use a Kanban board, the team that's using that Kanban board, what they're providing, you probably have multiple services in an organization that you need to balance against each other. So toggling these things to say, oh, this team is going too fast, this team is going too slowly, and so that's where you would scale this based on however many service delivery teams, however many Kanbans are feeding up into whether it's a department or a greater effort at an operations review. And so the questions then we're asking, are these the right levels of service across the organization, not just for this particular service, but relative to other services? Do we need to reallocate? So because organizations have a fixed amount of capacity for certain things. So based on what we're seeing at the operations level, is this the right investment that we want to be making? What kind of cross-team improvements do we need? Sometimes we have dependencies across teams that impact individual service levels. So again, this all goes back to this idea that we want to have useful conversations between a company and its customers, and those depend on useful conversations between the company's parts. Again, that's something that Cessna talks a lot about in his book, but having these useful conversations in the company's parts, delivering a holistic experience for our customers.
I think thanks. That gives it just a bit of things there. Yeah, but that really gives it a bit of a nice view to say, okay, yes, we were looking at this in isolation, but we can also look at it in bigger. And I don't think we need to delve too much deeper into it. I mean, as you said, you've got references there if somebody wants to delve deeper and so on. It's not probably our 3/4 of an hour, or our talk now nearly is much too small to look at this. We're just touching on it.
Yes, exactly right.
But I think you've given me a lot to think about, and hopefully our listeners and viewers as well, so that they can take this up and say, okay, that makes sense. Let me play with it and so on. If somebody, you provided your details early on, if somebody really has got a question, I guess they can look you up and have a bit of a chat. What also we said is for the all access pass holders, they obviously get a download of the slides, of all the slides and so on, and there might be a few more gems in there,
Sure.
which you can really look at and say we haven't gone into all the details in here, but on that, generally, what I'm asking all my interviewees is, of all the stuff we talked about, and maybe even something more, if you would have only one thing that one of our viewers remembered, what would you want them to remember?
Yeah, that's a great question. I usually tell people, whether getting started or just what's the bottom line here. I say find out from your customers what makes you fit for their purpose. Ask that fitness question. What do you value? Why have you selected us? And then build in some kind of a mechanism, whether you call it a service delivery review or something else, but have some kind of a regular mechanism for making useful conversations out of that. So that's what I would say. I would say find out that answer if you don't know it, and then build in a feedback loop to continually discover and change based on what you discover, so that you can adapt and survive, so that you are always flourishing as a business and not going the way of the dinosaurs.
And I think that repeated asking is also very important, what you're saying. It's not okay, we set it up once and then a year later we might revisit it, but it's somehow a repeated asking.
Exactly right. I think it does follow in that respect the same pattern as product development. Probably you don't just create it and ship it out and never touch it again. You're continually innovating. You're continually understanding what people want to use it for. And so I think it's the same pattern. One thing, it's interesting too, because a lot of organizations I think that I've worked with they struggle with our Agile adoption. We're doing an Agile transformation, and a lot of times it just ends up looking like compliance to practices. So we're ticking the box. We're doing stand-ups. We're doing these things. We have co-located teams. Okay, that's great. But really, and this comes again from Andy Carmichael, who I mentioned earlier, the idea of considering your adoption progress or your Agile transition progress in terms of how fit for purpose are you becoming. That's really why you're doing the Agile transformation in the first place. And so be measuring how fit for purpose you are through things like the service delivery review or operations review.
Great. Thanks very much. I think that gives it a nice wrap up there.
Thank you, Matthias. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to thank you again, and it was awesome. It was really nice to chat to you, and yes, thanks very much for making the time available.
Likewise. Thank you for the great questions.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that's coming leading in from what you've been saying. So thanks very much there. But I think for now, the only thing is to thank you again, Matt, and for sharing your experience. That was absolutely awesome. And I think that concludes our session. So it's a very good morning, a very good day, and a very good night to all of you, wherever on the globe you're watching this from. Thank you and goodbye.